Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Everkeep Extreme, where we face off against the Zeralja Thirst Edit. This is the second Extreme trial made available in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your trial guide. Before we begin, set up 6 markers in a line across the platform and assign each one to a non-tank player. The 2 extra way markers in the north corner of the platform will be assigned to the 2 tanks. You'll also need to pair up a support player to a damage dealer. All of this will come into play later in the fight. The encounter begins with the boss casting Actualize. This will occur throughout the encounter, dealing high raid-wide damage. Shield and heal as necessary. Multi-directional divide will form a cross AoE that must be avoided. After the initial attack, yellow cracks will appear over the platform that will soon explode in crisscrossing line AoEs across the platform. The boss will then cast backward or forward half, while at the same time, one of the swords on his side begins to glow. All of these attacks are half-room cleaves, and since they both go off at the same time, this essentially allows for only one quadrant around the boss to be safe. Determining this safe spot can be a bit counterintuitive at first, as the boss will jump to either the front or back of his hitbox based on the cast, causing him to turn in the process. If you see backward half, the players will need to stand behind the boss and on the opposite side of the glowing sword. If you see forward half, the players will need to stand in front of the boss and on the same side as the glowing sword. Once this cast begins, players will have to adjust accordingly while also making sure to stand in between the crisscrossing yellow lines, as all 3 attacks will go off at the exact same time. Another multi-directional divide will occur and players can pre-position themselves between the leftover yellow lines. Immediately after, Regicidal Rage will target 2 random players with passable tethers. The tanks will need to intercept these immediately, as the attack is a heavy-hitting tank buster that explodes in a wide circle. All players will need to stand in between the crisscrossing yellow lines while the tanks spread away from everyone and each other. Don't forget those cooldowns. Next up, Dawn of an Age will limit the platform size and begin a mini phase. This will also deal high raid-wide damage, so healers be ready. 4 outer platforms will form and the boss will cast Follock. This will spawn a number of swords on each platform in a random pattern. The boss will then cast Sync and 2 of the outer platforms will begin to glow. The swords on these 2 active platforms will be copied to the center platform, and players will need to dodge the tiles covered by incoming swords to avoid them. At the same time, the boss is casting half full, and players will need to look for the side with the glowing sword. They'll need to stand on the side opposite the glowing sword and on a tile unaffected by the incoming copied swords. To avoid overwhelming myself, I prefer to look at one platform at a time, finding the available safe tile before checking the second platform and the boss attack and adjusting as necessary. This will become easier with practice and exposure to the mechanics, so do your best. The boss will then cast Greater Gateway and 3 types of portals will appear at the center edge of each platform. Similar to normal mode, these portals will adjust the positioning of any attacks that hit them, but on Extreme, there are fire and wind portals that will also alter the incoming attack. The boss will cast Blade Warp and spawn a number of swords on the outer platforms. One set of swords will always form on a platform with regular portals, and these will be dodged normally. Another set will always form on a platform with the fire and wind portals, but only one elemental portal will ever be used at a time. If the swords are going through the green wind portals, players will have to expect an additional knockback from the lane that the sword comes out of. If the sword is going through the red fire portals, the output lane will be enhanced to 3 tiles wide, and players will need to move further away to dodge safely. Immediately after the sword attacks go off, all players will be marked with these triangle markers. This marker will cause the tile underneath the player to explode, dealing high damage and applying a debuff that cannot be overlapped with another tile explosion. To handle this, all players will need to spread to their own tiles before the explosions go off. The boss will then cast Actualize, deal raid-wide damage, and return the platform to normal. Next up, Projection of Triumph will form a number of swords in a grid pattern and 2 lines on opposite edges of the platform. One line will have donut markers on it, while the other one has circle markers. Each line will begin to move across the platform, and every time it overlaps a sword, their respective attack will apply to the swords. Players will need to be on top of a sword to dodge the donut line, or in between the swords to dodge the circle line. 2 sets of lines will move over the platform, and the boss will cast either forward or backward half with an overlapping glowing sword attack. Players will need to continue dodging the donut and circle lines as they move into position to dodge the boss attack. This can also seem very overwhelming at first, but can be broken down in a step-by-step manner. As soon as the swords and lines appear, players can move to the second line of swords on the donut line side. They'll stand there until the first donut line resolves around them. They will then immediately sidestep in between the swords in the same lane to allow the incoming circle line to resolve. At this point, the boss is casting forward or backward half, and players will move towards the safe quadrant, pausing on or in between swords as the lines cross them. Immediately after this line attack, they'll need to finalize their position for the boss boss attack and then immediately move again onto a sword or in between them for the final line attack. Next up, the boss will cast Projection of Turmoil, and a line with stack up markers will appear in the north. All players will also be afflicted by a projection debuff. This line will begin to move south across the platform, and anytime a player with this debuff touches the line, they'll be hit with a super heavy hitting attack that can and must be shared. This is where our waymarker line comes into play. As soon as the stack up line appears, players can move to their assigned waymarkers. The two tanks will take the line attacks as soon as possible, spreading at the edge of the arena to avoid overlapping one another. Since they're alone, they'll need to pop appropriate cooldowns to survive. This will remove their debuff and make them available to start helping the rest of the players soak their stack up line attacks. They'll stand with the next player in line to share their damage. They will all then move to the next player in line to share theirs, and so on until all players have exploded and the line disappears. Since the more players that share a stack, the less damage it does, the rate damage will be reduced as the line travels across each player, so healers plan your cooldowns appropriately. There's still a lot of healing to be done, so be ready with those shields and heals. Immediately after, the primary target will be targeted by Bitter Whirlwind. This is a 3-hit tank buster that will deal high damage and apply a debuff with each hit. Tanks can swap for each hit or use an immunity to take all of the hits alone. The boss will return to the center and cast Dawn of an Age, dealing raid-wide damage and changing the arena again. This time, only one outer platform will form, and players will need to move towards the edge in preparation for the next mechanic. The boss will cast Drum of Volok and target all players of the same role group with these blue circles. These circles deal super high damage and require 2 players in them or you will die. The marked players will also knock back their partners a set distance while they get knocked straight into the air. To handle this combo, the marked players will need to spread along the edge of the platform closest to the outer platform, while their partners come and stand with them. The unmarked players will need to position themselves between the circle players and the outer platform to be knocked onto that platform. Be careful with your angles here in relation to your partner, as you don't want to knock yourself the wrong way. As soon as you regain control over your character, move to the center so that healers can top you off. The boss will reposition between the 2 platforms and begin to cast Volok. A large sword will land in one quadrant on each platform, and the boss will begin to cast Sync. The 2 swords will both be mirrored onto the other platform, and players must reposition on their platform to dodge both attacks. As this is happening, all players will be marked with the yellow triangles and will need to spread to their own tile in an area safe from the swords to avoid overlap. This attack will also place a green tornado on each platform that will knock back and debuff any player that runs into it. For now, it should be avoided. The boss can then turn and cast forward or backward half with an overlapping glowing sword attack on one side. The player on the unsafe side of the incoming attack will have to move into their platform tornado at an angle appropriate to be knocked to the other platform. Once there, all players will need to adjust to the safe side to avoid the boss attack combo. If the platform tornado on that side happens to be in the safe area, be very careful not to step into it during this time. Immediately after, a player will be targeted with this lineup marker, and the group will have to stand together to share the damage of 4 hits. Each hit will also apply a stacking magic vulnerability up debuff, and the healing requirement can get pretty spicy. Use appropriate raid cooldowns, shields, and heals. The boss will then cast Burning Chains, and all players of a role group will be tethered to the others. They'll need to run a set distance away from each other to break the chain. To achieve this, whatever role group that did not have to jump earlier and is not debuffed will use the platform tornado to be knocked to the other side. If necessary, they can run further down that platform to break the chains. Next up, Actualize will deal more raid-wide damage and return the arena to normal. The boss will then cast Projection of Triumph again, and more swords and donut and circle lines will appear. This is handled in the same manner as before. The overlapping mechanics here are Half Circuit and Regicidal Rage. When the boss casts Half Circuit, players will have to closely look at his swords to determine if this attack is a point-blank circle attack in his hitbox or a room-wide donut attack around his hitbox. They'll need to move in or out of the boss while still handling the donut and circle lines at the same time. Immediately after, a Regicidal Rage will tether to 2 players, and the tanks will need to intercept the tethers and pull them away from others while continuing to avoid the line attacks. Players should stand outside of the hitbox during this time to allow the tanks to easily swoop around the boss and grab the tethers quickly and effectively. The next Projection of Turmoil will be handled in the exact same manner as before. This time, the boss will also leap to the center and cast Half Full. As players stack to share the incoming line damage, they'll need to make sure to step to the right or left of the center line to be on the opposite side of his glowing sword. The boss will cast 3 Half Full attacks in a row while the stack up line is up, so keep your eyes open. Next up, another Bitter Whirlwind Tank Buster. Tanks will swap with cooldowns or use an immunity to take all 3 hits alone. The boss will return to the center and cast Dawn of an Age one more time. The 4 outer platforms will appear, and the boss will cast Volok and Sync again. The sword patterns from 2 outer platforms will again copy over over to the center platform, and players will need to again find the safe tiles formed by the overlap. Immediately after, players will be targeted with the yellow triangle markers and will need to quickly spread to their own tiles to avoid overlap. Duty's Edge will mark another player for lineup, and you'll need more heavy healing, shielding, and raid cooldowns to get through it. The boss will cast another Greater Gateway, Blade Warp, and Forge Track, and players will need to identify which elemental portal the blades are going through and adjust into the safe tiles in the same manner as before. As soon as the swords resolve, players will again spread to their own tile for the triangle markers. Another Actualize will return the platform to normal at this time. The boss will cast one more multi-directional divide and another back or forward half and glowing sword combo. This is identical to the very first mechanic of the encounter and handled in the exact same manner. Finally, the boss will begin casting a Hard Enrage Actualize, and you'll have until this cast goes off to destroy him or you will die. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, I'll see you in Savage. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.